Okay, I want to dive into the nuts and bolts of resonance in this video. But first, let me present another demonstration to guide this discussion. You'll remember from the previous video that I said you can excite a note by holding it down and then striking another note that is within its harmonic series. I demoed the first overtone, second overtone, and fourth overtone, but what happens when I do this with the sixth overtone, or seventh harmonic? Just as I suggested, the B-flat harmonic rings out. However, compare this tone to the note you hear when just playing the B-flat key. It's a bit flat. This is because of the way the piano is tuned. The B-flat in the harmonic series of C is not exactly the same frequency as the B-flat on the keyboard, but they are close enough that there is still some sympathetic resonance. Back in Bitklavier, you might be wondering if resonance models this behavior. Let's try it out. The difference in tuning is quite audible here with the current resonance settings. When you strike the B-flat while holding the C, the tone is much flatter than if you had just struck the B-flat. And if you open up the resonance preparation and navigate to this panel, you can see why this is. This panel defines the overtone structure of any held note. By default, resonance uses a standard harmonic overtone structure. The second keyboard from bottom shows the notes on the keyboard that are closest to the partials of the held note, or fundamental, which is indicated by the bottom keyboard. You can see we have the first overtone an octave above the fundamental, second overtone a twelfth above, and so on. Holding the fundamental and striking any of these notes will generate a sympathetic resonance. However, certain notes in the partial structure may ring louder, and this is displayed by the keyboard of gains at the top. By default, the octaves ring loudest. Also, because the default partial structure follows the harmonic series, some notes in the partial structure don't correspond exactly to equally tempered notes. The offset keyboard shows this. For example, the B-flat in the overtone structure is 31.2 cents flat from the equal tempered B-flat. This explains the discrepancy that I demonstrated before. It's also important to note that while this partial structure shows C0 as the held note, the partial structure transposes as you play. So, for example, if I play an E-flat 3, the partial structure transposes up 3 octaves and 3 semitones. And I can generate sympathetic resonances using the appropriate partials. Also, resonance can get a little bit confusing when you consider the ways the partials of different notes may overlap. For instance, what happens if I hold the C and strike the E-flat that is 3 semitones above? If you were just looking at this resonance panel, you might say, oh well, nothing will ring since E-flat isn't in the partial structure of C. But this is what happens. The note that rings is a G a couple of octaves above these notes. This is because that G is a shared note in both partial structures. It's the fifth overtone of the C and the fourth overtone of the E-flat. It's important to remember this when you're hearing sympathetic resonances that you don't expect. Okay, so with all that explaining done, I'll do a brief demonstration. One thing that I think makes a pretty cool sound is changing the held note to something not already in the overtone series. Let's try F1. Note that F1 also needs to be selected as a resonant note in the second keyboard for this to work. And then, just because I think it would be fun if things were a bit out of tune, I'm going to pull all the C's really flat. You can adjust the offset of a partial by clicking on that key in the offset keyboard. The higher you click, the sharper, and the lower the flatter. And you can also just drag like this. But I'm going to pull all the C's pretty flat. And you can adjust the gains in a similar way, but I'm just going to leave those how they are. And here's how it sounds. One way to make this even cooler, in my opinion, is to take the direct out of the picture. That way, you just hear only the sympathetic resonances. Now it sounds like this. And if you open up resonance and navigate to the other panel, you can pull the attack time way up. Now it sounds like this. All right, that's all I've got. I encourage you to experiment on your own and maybe check out the resonance example galleries if you need a little inspiration.